Great. Thank you so much, Rebecca. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. I wish we could be doing this in person. A couple of years ago, Sharon hosted us, a few of us, at a meeting in Charleston. It was such a fantastic, incredible city that I can't wait to come back. I am going to see if I can get my slides up here. Let's see. Oops.
You're doing better than me. For some reason, after a year, I still struggle sharing my PowerPoint slides.
Does it look okay now? Can you see it?
Yes, you got it. You're perfect.
Okay, wonderful. Thanks. All right. Well, again, thanks for inviting me to join you today. I am going to talk more specifically about tobacco retailer licensing, which I know isn't always the sexiest, most exciting topic, but I will assure you that it is really a powerful tool. And it's important because it can be used very directly by different communities to accomplish their own goals. And I'll talk more specifically about that as we get through this. But I think it's also an important health equity tool. I'm going to talk kind of at a really high level, so giving you a bird's eye view of some of the structural components of a good tobacco retailer licensing policy, some of the individual policies that can fit underneath that. And then I also want to talk, and I know Gustavo talked a bit about this too, but I think that the importance of preemption and continuing to counter preemptive efforts is really fundamental to all of the work that we do. And I know that that has been front and center in South Carolina this past session. So I do want to make sure that I talk a bit about that as well. So thanks again for the introduction. I'll just give you a quick background. As Rebecca said, I work for the Public Health Law Center. We are located in beautiful St. Paul, Minnesota. We're going through a kind of a Midwestern heat wave right now. So we always like to focus on how much we complain about the winter. We are never, as Midwesterners, we're never quite happy with the weather. But we are located in the Bdote region, which is the birthplace and center of all things for the Dakota people. And I think you gave a good background of the type of the work that we do. This is our commercial tobacco control team. So I hope that many of you have had some contact with us, and if not, that you will at some point in the future. We have a really wonderful and very friendly, robust group of attorneys and policy analysts who are all working on commercial tobacco control. Our bread and butter activity at the center is to provide free, individualized legal technical assistance. And I like to make sure that people are aware of that because we really encourage you to contact us if you ever have questions about anything related to commercial tobacco control. And to give you a sense of what that means, because I didn't know when I started, to be honest, it's kind of a unique area of law. We provide legal research and analysis. So if you have a question about whether a particular policy is legally feasible, what the evidence base is, we try to kind of package all that information together and how policies can be developed. We keep a good sense of the types of policies that are being implemented, adopted and implemented around the country, and how effective they are in accomplishing their goals. And so what we try to do is take all that information and really put it together again, in an individualized way to make sure that we can help you to develop a policy that's going to do what you want it to do. And then hopefully that's going to avoid litigation. But as Gustavo said, that's the industry's best friend. So that is not always possible. So secondarily, we want to make sure that if there is litigation, that you're put in the best position to survive that. So we do a lot of the kind of the front end policy work, but also making sure that we understand how important it is that a policy is implemented and evaluated. We have one of the largest libraries of commercial tobacco control publications. We have a lot of resources on our website. I encourage you to check that out if you are interested. We do a lot of training, so we are constantly moving around the country now, always virtually, but can't wait to be doing it in person again and talking to folks and getting a better sense of what your needs are and what your policy priorities are. What we don't do, which is unusual for a legal center, is we don't do any direct client representation. So most of our work in litigation is either in helping to support communities that are unfortunately subject to litigation, so helping them with background information, mock trials, things like that. But mostly it's through amicus or friend of the court briefs. And we do those, we draft those and file them to make sure that the public health perspective is represented in the court record, which is very important because courts aren't experts in public health. And then we don't do any lobbying as well. All of our work is really done through health equity led. We know that we are working in opposition to an industry that has, for many decades, very directly and successfully targeted certain communities, and it tends to be communities that are more marginalized, more disadvantaged, and they have created significant health disparities. So all of our work is really intended to help to address that and to reduce those health disparities. So I always think it's important to start off kind of structurally talking about what state and local authority is for a particular policy. And so I think this is important for all of the kind of the suite of policies that can be included under a tobacco retailer license, or TRL. So the Tobacco Control Act identifies really kind of where the split is on what kinds of authority is restricted to the federal government and what is allowed for state governments to regulate. And really the kind of in a nutshell, the federal government retains the authority, exclusive authority, to regulate manufacturing standards, tobacco product standards. So anything that's on the manufacturing realm state and locals are preempted from regulating. But the important thing, and this is where most litigation occurs, is in this preemption, is based on federal preemption. The act very clearly and explicitly gives state and local governments the authority to enact laws related to the sale, prohibiting the sale of tobacco products or certain type of products or any other mechanism at the point of sale on how a product is sold. So I think that those are kind of the clear delineations, and that's really where the TRLs fit. So key elements of any good policy, comprehensiveness, of course, is important. We have found some evidence of there's concerns, of course, when there are both in terms of the effectiveness of policies that are not comprehensive, but also they tend to, and we'll talk about this in a minute too, they tend to be more susceptible to litigation as well. Clear definitions and concise language. We, as attorneys, often are accused, and often rightfully, of making things unnecessarily complicated. And our view is that should never be the case, that language in a policy, in a statute, in an ordinance should be clear to read for anybody. So it's important that we are able to develop plain language. Relying on a strong evidence base, of course, that's essential for anything we do. The implementation process is something that's often overlooked. I think we tend to focus on the front end often when drafting policies, but it's really, really important that a policy has an effective mechanism for implementation, for education. I think we always say a poorly implemented policy is probably worse than not having one at all. And then again, we want to make sure that we think about the equitable outcomes of any policy, and how penalties are structured, avoiding penalties that are going to be focused on youth who have been predatorily targeted by the industry, and really focusing on the retailers and the industry itself. So we all know what a license is. A license is something that a governmental entity allows an individual or a business to apply for. It sets a number of ground rules that the licensee must abide by, and it establishes the terms of it. It's not a right, and I think that's the important thing. It's a privilege that can be afforded based on following those rules. And so it's a really powerful tool. We all have driver's, or most of us have driver's licenses. But in the tobacco realm, the commercial tobacco realm, it can be really powerful because it is just really a key structure, and it allows, again, a community or a state to tailor the policy to its own needs. You can identify the policies that seem to be the most effective based on use patterns, based on youth use, really almost anything, and those can be housed under the same structure, which has the same penalty, same enforcement mechanism, the same compliance checks that can be built in. So all these are part of the same policy. And what's really effective is that, so any violation of any of those policies within the license result in, kind of graduated penalties, typically starting with monetary fines, and then ultimately going to suspension or revocation. I think that's really important because that's what we found to be the most effective in ensuring compliance. And also it streamlines the process. With a license can be suspended or revoked. it's an easier way to not have to go to court to do that for the jurisdiction that's enforcing it. It also induces the owners of businesses to really train their staff to make sure that they are complying. Starting off with a good policy, providing the evidence base is really, really important. We always find these, I think sometimes they sound like they're strangely written, but we have so much evidence on all the policies that we'll be talking about. I mean, I think, Gustavo showed a wealth of evidence on flavor policies and the importance of flavor policies. So including those can be really helpful in the event that there's litigation. The courts will look to say, okay, is there a sufficient evidence base, and also they can show legislative intent for what types of products were intended to be included in the event that there's some ambiguity in the language. And we know, in South Carolina alone, in 2019, 22% of high school kids were current users of e-cigarettes, and 30% were current users of tobacco. So the problem is real and significant. I know this one breaks all of the rules of PowerPoint, but definitions, again, not the most exciting topic, but perhaps the most important topic. We help to develop really comprehensive definitions, and it's important that you have a comprehensive definition because the industry, and again, as Gustavo was talking about, how fast and how quickly the industry can pivot based on definitions or new policies to make sure that they always have a product and are always able to addict new users and keep the income coming. So we suggest a really broad tobacco product policy for TRLs. It should include e-cigarette products, the whole continuum of up through combustible products. What I think is a couple elements of this that we feel like are very important is that it includes any product that's made or derived from tobacco is one, but also anything that contains nicotine. First of all, I think that's in part because we have the new products, like the puff bars, which are arguing that they are made from synthetic nicotine. We don't know for sure that that's true, but we do know that synthetic nicotine is becoming more economically viable and that it will be here before long. And we really want to focus on ensuring that nicotine products are not excluded from these policies. E-cigarettes, of course, are part of it. And we also want to make sure that it includes all the ancillary components as well, and that is also in part the other things that could be flavoring products like the hemp wraps, or in Canada they were starting to sell little cards that added flavoring to the products. We want to make sure that those are also included as tobacco products under the license. Minimum legal sale age. We know that the federal law is now 21 in South Carolina. So South Carolina is not yet, but we know the importance. I think we always look back to the industry where there was a litigation 20 years ago. We learned, and the discovery of all the documents, we learned so much more about the industry and how far ahead of us they were in their market research and their understanding of use patterns. And they've known for a long time that increasing the age and just pushing back the initiation age is a really important way for them to continue to addict users, but for us to really kind of find those critical points where we can reduce youth use and subsequently adult use. That's something that I want to talk about. The flavor or the age restrictions are something that are currently preempted most likely in South Carolina at the local level. Minimum legal sale age for a clerk as well. Many jurisdictions require the clerk to be a certain age. There's a lot of research showing that one of the primary ways that youth users get the products is through friends who are working at convenience stores. So increasing that age can be very helpful. Then we go to kind of which products can be sold. And again, Gustavo did an excellent job of talking about the importance of flavors, but I would just reiterate that we never want to get in a situation where we have the most dangerous product that is still on the market. We know why the industry has fought so hard and continues to fight so hard to keep menthol on the market. It's because it is easier to initiate. It changes the brain chemistry, making it harder to quit. It's been predatorily targeted toward African-American communities and LGBTQ communities, and really effectively. They want to keep this product on the market. But again, it's very clearly under the authority of state and local governments to remove it. So a broad, comprehensive policy that includes all flavors is the best public health practice. And again, I think we talked a little bit about, or Gustavo talked a little bit about the FDA, and I just want to echo that. I don't think we can say strongly enough that we do not want to wait for the FDA. We know it's going to be going through the notice and comment process will take at least 2 years, and again, that's absent litigation, which we fully expect. So I think that's, we want the FDA to move. We want to move as quickly as they can, but that should not stop state and local governments from moving forward as well. But for flavor policies, looking at how they're enforced, understanding how concept flavors are identified, all those things should be thought about and considered and planned for at the front end. And those are things that if you have questions on, we can talk about them. All of these, of course, could take, we could spend hours talking about different ways to approach them. How the products are sold and marketed, and this is really getting into the pricing element. Again, going back to the industry documents, they know young people are very, very price sensitive, so they want to make sure that they discount the products as much as they can, allow cheap products to be sold to addict new consumers. The marketing, I think it's interesting because of the Master Settlement Agreement and the restrictions and the 1970 law that was passed that doesn't allow television advertising. So it looks like it's not quite as ubiquitous as it is, but the industry spends close to $9 billion a year on marketing. Most of that is at the point of sale. Most of that is on discounting and coupons. So buy one, get one free, reduced price of products. It's really all about making someone feel like they're getting a deal and lowering the price to allow people to initiate. And often this is done more frequently in lower socioeconomic communities, unfortunately. The industry is really easy or quick to manipulate products. In 2009, after the FDA prohibited the sale of all but menthol flavored combustible cigarettes, the industry would just change the product. So this is an example of showing cherry cigarettes, which were then repackaged and called cigars. So the flavored cigars have been a huge problem among youth specifically, and we know that will continue to be the case. So some policy options that can be used under a TRL that will increase that, that economic floor are minimum pack sizes, so requiring the products to be sold in a certain pack, 3 or 5 in a package, and those have to be combined, of course, also with minimum prices. We have some where they did one or the other, and we saw the industry just start selling them for 3 for 99 cents or some absurdly low price, just to again to get people to buy them, mostly kids. So combination of minimum pack sizes, minimum prices, and then usually pairing that with restrictions on coupon and discounts. So the coupon piece, I would say it's important to structure those as the redemption of coupon is restricted, not the provision of coupons. There's a First Amendment issue that can be that could be implicated if you are talking about how a product or the marketing of a product, but the redemption is a sales restriction that's clearly under the authority of state and local governments. So anything to make sure that the products are not sold, with the bright sale sign that looks like people are getting a short-term deal. I think those can be psychologically very compelling. Then the other side, beside the products that can be sold, is who can sell them and where can the products be sold. And again, this is another really powerful component of a strong TRL. There's a lot of research to show that pharmacies are particularly problematic, that they often sell, as Lisa Hendrickson from Stanford's done a lot of research on this. The pharmacies have some of the lowest prices of tobacco products and some of the highest prices for water, strangely enough. But there's also research showing that that bans on pharmacy sales of tobacco products are really effective. And I think there's also just a fundamental truth that maybe that industries that are really in the health business probably shouldn't be selling these addictive products. And so again, that's something that's been litigated as well, and pharmacy bans have been upheld. Also, mobile stores, the mall kiosks were a big one with e-cigarettes, of course, at the front end, and those, there's not a lot of investment in those, I think, and so they've tended to be, we found a lot of them were not adhering to the existing laws. And then in this time of the pandemic, there have been a lot of online and curbside pickup restrictions that have been popping up as a result of what the industry's been doing. And I think the online sale one is a harder one to enforce, but it's still, there are jurisdictions that have been working toward doing that. And then where the products can be sold. We know that the industry, again, is very effective at targeting their products to certain communities. They know who they want to use the products. Here in St. Paul, where I live, there is a restriction on adult-only, tobacco-only retailers and how close they have to be a mile away from each other within the city. So restricting density is, can be really effective because we know that the industry tends to have much higher density of the sales of their products. And of course, that results in much more effective marketing of the products in communities of color and in lower socioeconomic communities. Also restricting their distance from schools or residential areas. There's a lot of research showing the effectiveness of that, it's really that youth exposure that leads to more youth use. Density can be done by population. A number of tobacco retail licenses can be capped based on population. So, 1 per 10,000 population, something like that. Another way to reduce, and this has been something we saw for a while, and then I think we didn't see too many policies that were in this realm, but there's just another one that passed here in one of the suburbs of the Twin Cities, but reducing the number of tobacco retailers based on the licenses. And so either capping the number of licensing, we only can have this many licenses in this jurisdiction, or this cap and reduce approach, which says that we have X number of licenses, we want to have 30% less than that. So what we're going to do is anytime somebody doesn't renew a license or one time one gets suspended or revoked, we will not issue a new license to fill that. We won't issue another license for that one. We will just keep going down, winnowing it down until we get to where we want the cap to be. So it's a way to reduce the total number throughout the jurisdiction. And the penalty structure, which is an important part of any TRL. And I talked about this a little bit at the beginning. And I think this is a really important equity issue because we know that penalties on youth users are not effective in reducing tobacco use. That has been shown through research. But also more importantly, I think, or equally importantly, is that we don't want to have a mechanism where kids, and especially kids of color, are coming into contact more with law enforcement for reasons that are not effective in reducing for the policy objectives at all. So we want to really work on rethinking how we establish these penalties and focusing specifically on the retailer, not on the clerks and not on the users, but on the retailers themselves. I mean, they have the power to train staff and to ensure that the products are not being sold to youth users. Specifying the compliance checks, number of compliance checks for each business per year is an important element of a strong policy. And that would increase in the event that there is a business that is not complying. You would increase the number of compliance checks and then setting the appropriate fees. And that's also really important. We have some checklists that we're developing a kind of a calculator that can help you come up with that number, but it's important to make sure that the fees are sufficient to cover the administration of the whole program. They can't be more or significantly more. That would be falling into calling a fee a tax, but they can pay for the product, the program itself, and that's what they should be doing. Let's talk a bit about exemptions. I think that's really where we're seeing a lot of focus from the industry. And we know that exemptions are intended really just to benefit the industry. There's no public health benefit ever in adding exemption for a particular product, whether it's menthol or a particular type of business. Often we see that with hookah bars right now in many communities, but there isn't any public health benefit. What ends up happening is it ends up continuing to target the same communities that have been targeted by the industry historically. One other problem with exemptions, and I think sometimes this is more compelling to city or county attorneys who have questions about this, is that they also increase the likelihood of litigation. We saw that a lot in smoke-free laws when certain types of establishments would be exempt from a particular policy. And the reason is that if there has to be a rational reason why you're treating two businesses in different ways, otherwise you run into equal protection concerns. And so sometimes that's an important point to make to those officials who are advocating for exemptions, that they can end up resulting in more litigation. And then I want to talk about preemption a bit, because I think this is really as important, as I said before, of an issue as we are facing right now. And I think, I'm sure probably most of you know what preemption is, but just in case you don't, it's a really simple concept. Preemption is when a higher level of government eliminates the authority that a lower level of government would otherwise have. So it's when the federal government says states don't have the authority to do this. In the Tobacco Control Act, the states don't have the authority to set manufacturing standards or tobacco product standards for the product. It's something that is important for our, it's an essential element of our legal system. If there has to be a way, if there's two laws that are inconsistent with each other, or that are in direct conflict, that we have to know which one will supersede the other one. So it makes total sense. But it wasn't until about 35 years ago that the tobacco industry realized, hey, this is a really great opportunity to weaponize this and to stop and restrict local governments from moving forward on commercial tobacco control policies, which we know is where most of the good policies really start at the local level and move their way up. So this was in Florida on a smoke-free law, and that preemptive law is still on the books, and they actually just passed a much more restrictive preemptive law this past session, unfortunately. So it's really hard to remove preemption once it's on the books. But the industry realized if we can just get preemptive laws in 50 states, we don't have to worry about doing any lobbying, any work at the local levels, because they don't have the authority anymore. Preemption is a really fundamental health equity issue. It's been used by the industry to punish cities like Philadelphia, which has been moving forward on a lot of really progressive policies, flavor policies, some density policies, things like that. And I think we really view it as an essential equity issue, because every jurisdiction has the understanding of what's most important and what their own community looks like and which policies are going to be the most effective in that community. And this really restricts a community from doing that. So sometimes we end up seeing aggregate numbers and macro level numbers that look really great. We've got a low rate of combustible cigarette use, which is wonderful, but that's not, we really need to be able to segment that out and look at different communities and see that's not always the case. Some communities are really being ravaged by the tobacco industry. We see different approaches attaching it to public health bills. That happened in Hawaii a couple of years ago. It was attached to a funding for kidney dialysis, which of course is really hard for legislators and the governor to oppose. There's a group called the American Legislative Exchange Council, ALEC, which works on preemptive bills, not just in commercial tobacco control, but throughout, in environmental laws, in worker protections, and all kinds of other areas. We know Jewel has worked with them on developing model language. And I guess, the bottom line is it's just never a good trade-off. It ends up chilling all activity because people don't want to get sued. It's often written in really vague ways. And we're seeing more and more preemptive policies that are written, to talk about just the consumer goods instead of just tobacco control products. We don't know what the scope of them is. And local communities, of course, are understandably litigation averse. And so it ends up chilling a lot of local activity. So really encourage state laws to, whenever possible, to have express anti-preemption language. In South Carolina, unfortunately, you do have some preemption, and it's kind of, again, like in lots of cases, it's written in a kind of a strange way. Thankfully, there is a court case that talks about it. It doesn't completely answer all the questions that we would have, but it restricts basically age restrictions are preempted at the local level. The language is kind of broad, but the South Carolina Supreme Court in a decision that was based on, it was related to a smoke-free law, said that it could only preempt areas of policy that were specifically implicated in that section of the code, which is the youth access. So it would be things like youth access and like location of vending machines, things like that. But licensing, flavor policies, density, location, all those things should still be under the authority of local governments. Again, this doesn't mean that state governments are not preempting themselves. So there's still, if there's a state license, could still include any of these other elements as well. But as Gustav also mentioned, I think we want to congratulate you on not, in opposing, successfully opposing 3681, which would have been a really broadly damaging preemptive bill. And it shows, I think it specifically contemplates licensing as one of the elements that would be preempted. So I think that was a really big victory, but I think it's important also to remember that this is going to come back, that the industry is there. We have seen more preemptive activity around the country this past session than we ever had before, and we were expecting a lot, and we're still overwhelmed. A few states were successful, and unfortunately several states have preemption now in the books, and it's really, really, as I said before, hard to get it off once it's there. So I think, it's kudos to you, but the work is still not done in preemption. As I mentioned before, we have a lot of resources on our website, so I encourage you to take some time and check them out. We have some model ordinances that we do for specific jurisdictions because we have contracts with the state of California and state of Minnesota. Sometimes those are helpful, but we would encourage you, we do feel like it's really important if you are moving forward with a tobacco retailer licensing or any other policy that you contact us and we can help you develop something that's really going to accomplish your own needs. It's not always a good idea to take a model policy and try to implement it because every jurisdiction is unique and your legal structure is unique. So with that, I can, hopefully I'm close to being on time here. I can take any questions if there are any. I can stop sharing.
Oh, you made it exactly 30 minutes. That was impressive. Mark, you've got access to the chat box, correct? Because you've got a few questions in there.
Okay, sorry, I haven't looked yet.
Okay, wasn't expecting you to.
Well, I will first of all say, Sharon, it's great to virtually see you. Hopefully we'll see each other soon. Sorry, and this is...
No, that's okay. I can summarize it. It's the ID software that Jules developed at point of sale.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like anything, we know a little bit about it, I think not as much as I would like to. I think we are, everything Jules has done has proven to be in their own self-interest and not for any public health benefit. I mean, I think that they are the concern about data privacy is, I think, really, really important. We don't want to give them any more information that they have. They've been trying to do other programs with tribal nations, with school districts around the country. There's nothing there's no evidence to suggest that they've done anything that except to enhance their bottom line. I mean, when they voluntarily took some products off the market, they had the menthol mint distinction, which was, a distinction without a difference. I guess the bottom line I would say is just I would not trust them and, on that or anything else. And I think that there are other mechanisms for ID checking that are much more effective. But I think that's only one small component of an effective policy too.
And is there any evidence that localities and states with licensing laws have lower rates of illegal sales to minors and or lower rates of youth smoking tobacco use?
Let's see, other evidence that they have lower rates of legal sales. There are. I would have to get that for you. There is research showing the effectiveness of TRLs. But that's a good question. I don't have it handy, but that's something I can follow up with.
Okay.
And youth use as well. And I think a lot of the policies there, we look at specific policies, and I think so. The TRL is kind of the general structure, and I think sometimes we look at it because they're also different. Some of them include flavor policies, some of them include T21, so we're bringing more information on that, but I think it kind of depends on what the TRL looks like and how it's structured with whether, whether there's compliance checks and whether there's effective enforcement as well. But there has been, there is definitely some causation correlation between having a strong policy and lower use and better compliance.
All right, and the next one, it looks like Beth Johnson actually answered that vape shops would be part of the TRL bill. They would need to purchase a license. I have a question. I'm curious, do you, in states that have passed TRL, is working at the local level and having local TRL, has that had any positive impact rolling up to the state level?
That I don't know. I mean, I think the question, I think, is there a question on whether vape shops should be included? I mean, I think that I hope I answered that. Yeah, we feel like all tobacco products, including e-cigarettes, of course, should be under the same TRL. I don't know if there's, I don't know the answer to that, whether that more local policies have created state level licensing. I think each state does it a little bit differently. And there are states that are certainly very averse to licensing, and often state licensing is administered in a different way. I mean, what we see in a lot of cases, they're focused primarily on tax collection more so than the other kind of policies that we talked about here today. And those are, usually taxes not something that local governments have the authority to do at all anyway. So I think sometimes there are kind of differences, but I don't know if there's a good answer to. There's a threshold of local policies that have then bubbled up to creating a similar type of state policy, because states all have some mechanism in place where they're trying to track to make sure that they are collecting taxes.
Anybody have any more questions to add in there? Mark, you covered, again, just like Gustavo, I think you covered so much of what we all would have wanted to know. I don't know if there's additional questions. I'll give it another minute or so. Are there any states right now that are very close or that got close this session that looks like they're ready and might happen next year as far as passing to state TRL?
I'm sorry, Rebecca, I think my connection glitched a little bit first. I apologize.
Sorry. I was just wondering if there are any states that are very close and that look like they're imminent for passing TRL, maybe next year.
Not that I know of. We to be honest, we tend to work more at the local level for TRL. Right? Almost all of our work is done with localities.
That's good to know. Okay.
I think that the states that are looking at flavor policies tend to already have a state license in place, because I think that it's really hard to enforce a flavor policy without having a robust retailer licensing policy in place as well.
Okay.
Except,
any other questions?
I think South Carolina is the one exception, of course, and I know we did work with you on that as well. But I don't know if other states that had a bill that was very close for a statewide TRL. Sorry.
Yeah, okay. If that is all, we'll get an extra couple minutes for a coffee break. Again, Mark, thank you so very much. We appreciate your time. We appreciate the information.
Yeah, thanks for having me.